and give ourselves just a clean look at getting this thing all set up. So I'm going to start off by opening up my project repo here, which was the equivalent of Django Imager for the class. So looking at this thing, we should all be remembrant of the fact that we've got this .env file. So we'll just set this aside for a second and come back to that. The first thing that we want to do before we get into the project is go back to AWS and provision an EC2 instance and an RDS instance to get ourselves started. And that way we can just get those up and running and set them aside while they're provisioning, and then we can do a couple of other things like work on the application. So I'm going to start off with the RDS instance. I've got a couple that are deleting. These are from our earlier demos. So I'm going to start a brand new LaunchDB instance. I'm going to click on Postgres. Just a quick reminder, don't forget to check the free tier enabled button down there so we don't inevitably click on something that's going to cost us a bunch of money. We can scroll pretty much quickly through this thing. We don't need to worry too much about the settings up here. But we do need to give this, or want to give this, an instance name. So I'll call this Django Shopper. I'm going to throw down my normal username and my dummy password. And just a quick reminder on that last screen, don't forget to store your username and password. That's not just some ambiguous like username and pass that you throw in and never use. We actually need that thing to connect to our database later on. On this next screen, don't need to worry about anything up here at the top of network and security. A couple of things down here we want to make sure that we keep track of. The public accessibility, it should default to yes, and then we're going to choose an existing VPC network. Okay, we should already have one of these configured for our EC2 instance. I'm going to go ahead and set this up as Shopper Demo. And that's the same VPC security group that I'm going to use for my EC2 instance. So there's other more practical ways to do this. We're trying to keep this simple for right now. So just use the same one that we've been using up to this point, and then we'll make sure in a few minutes that that's configured correctly. Okay. Database name for me is going to be Shopper. Don't need to change the port number or the group name or anything else there. We can pretty much scroll all the way down to the bottom, hit LaunchDB. Okay. We're going to go view DB instances, and I'm just going to let that one sit while we configure our EC2 instance. I'm going to come over to launch EC2 instance. Just a quick reminder, make sure that you're selecting the right AMI. We want to make sure we're on the free tier eligible and that we're working on an Ubuntu server. Because if you look down this list a little bit, there's similar looking AMIs that are not the same. Right? Specifically, you could do a 14.04 version for Ubuntu server, but you get down right below that and you see this one's specific to .NET Core, and then there's a couple of others. So just make sure we're on Ubuntu 16, server 16 specifically. Select that, and we're going to zip forward to step 6. Okay, this is where we're going to select an existing security group, and we should select the same one that we just selected for our EC2 instance. For me, that was called Shopper Demo. Okay. Don't worry too much if these don't match up exactly for inbound outbound rules yet. We're going to figure that out in a few minutes and make sure that everything's configured. But what we'll end up wanting is an HTTP IPv4 IPv6 for port 80. This custom TCP rule is something we selected from a drop-down that specifically said Postgres, and now it says custom TCP rule, which is fine. The important piece here is the port and the source. So if you don't see the port, that we need to fix, and then we'll fix the source as well here in a few minutes. And then the other piece that we need is the SSH. Okay, we need both of those in order for us to get access to the machine through an SSH connection. Once you've got that, review and launch. Okay, it's going to tell you your security is bad. It's open to the world. Don't worry too much about it right now. Go ahead and launch this thing. I'm going to connect using an existing key pair, because at this point we've covered this a couple of times. I'm going to use the simple app key pair, and I'm going to acknowledge that I've already got that thing sitting in my machine. Okay. If you don't have this already, don't have it set up, we've got a couple of demos and videos that'll cover this, so just go back and find those days. It's going to be from Tuesday and Wednesday, setting those up. So just if you create a new one or need to create a new one, download it, move it to your .ssh directory. If you don't have a .ssh directory, create one, then move it, then run chmod 400 on that PEM file, and then we can reference it as if it were there to begin with. So choose an existing. I'm going to use a simple app. I acknowledge I have this thing, launch instance, and then I'm going to click here and jump over to the instances. Okay. So while this is provisioning and the RDS is provisioning, I'm going to jump back over here and talk about a couple of changes that we made. So the first and foremost thing that we changed today was that we added a production.py. Okay. Right at the top of that file, we're saying go to the settings module, which is right here, and import everything. So essentially what that's like doing is it's saying copy all of this stuff and make it available in the namespace here in this file. Right? We don't want to have to duplicate all of this. So rather than having a duplicate file, we're just importing all of those pre-existing settings into production.py, and then rather than the application referring to shopper.settings in production, this Django settings module environment variable is going to point to shopper.production. Okay? What that allows us to do is further extend that settings file here in production.py. Right? So for example, we're going to set debug to false, whereas in our development environment we have debug set to true. Okay? So create a production.py if you don't have it. Be sure that it's in the same directory as settings.py. This was a mistake that a few folks made today in the workshop. Okay? No changes to whiskey.py. All we're doing is making sure that we understand the reference between this environment variable that's been there from the start, we just really haven't been exposed to it, and the fact that in development we're operating on just settings.py, but in production we'll be operating on shopper.settings. Okay? Then we made one small change to settings.py here on line 29. Okay, the pre-existing value that we had here was allowed hosts, and it had a value of an empty list. Okay, we're getting rid of that so that we can load the allowed hosts in through the environment and configure this thing specifically for production. As soon as we turn debug to false, Django requires us to have something as a value to this inside of this list. So what you might see at times, if you're just opening up your API to the world, is a star, and that's just going to whitelist everything. We don't want that. What we want is to specifically configure a client to be able to connect to our machine. Okay? So our allowed hosts is going to look at the environment and get an allowed host environment variable. If nothing exists, it's an empty string, which is fine. That's going to break our app. The split means that the value of allowed hosts is going to be a space-separated string of hosts. Okay, so for example, we're going to have the host address, the public DNS to our EC2 instance, space localhost. So we'll take a look at that here in a few minutes. That's the only change that we made to this file. Okay? Nothing else needs to change at this point. If we wanted, what we might also do is collect our static assets here locally and then push those up to the repo so that Django has those available. I'm going to do that on the server though. Okay? So if we close all of this down, I'm going to go ahead and open up my .ssh config file. Again, if you don't have this config file, all of you should at this point, but if you don't, create one, open it up in your editor, and now at this point, most of y'all have at least one, maybe two of these. If you don't have anything, just a reminder, ignore lines 1 through 4. These are all things that we've configured this week. Okay? And what we're doing is we're basically saying, hey, SSH command. When I type you in my terminal, SSH -i /.ssh imagersite.pem Ubuntu at this address ends up becoming SSH Imager. Right, so we give ourselves a little bit of a shortcut here and eliminate the need to remember how to configure this thing. So we set it up once, and then anytime we want to connect to that machine again, we just reference the name. And this Imager, Simple App, Shopper App, they could be whatever we want. Monkey, Banana, Balloon, doesn't matter. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and grab the public DNS from the machine that we just configured. I'm going to call this one host shopper. We're going to give it a host name of that EC2 instance, a user of Ubuntu. Don't change Ubuntu, just that is what it is and let it be. And then we're going to give it an identity file of this simpleapp.pem, which is the same one that I've used in the past and the one that I just configured that instance with when I created it a few minutes ago. Okay, it asked me, do you want to create a new key pair? Do you want to use an existing key pair? I said, I'm going to use an existing key pair that's already on the machine, and that's the one that I chose. So now in my terminal, now that I've got this set up, I should be able to type SSH shopper and connect to that new instance. Okay, so we'll save that, close that, jump back to the terminal here. SSH shopper. It's going to ask me, I don't know who this is or what machine this is. Would you like to add it to known hosts? I'm going to say yes. And now I'm into my machine. Okay, so we've made it all the way through the point of setting up our instances, creating our app, or more specifically configuring our application. And now we're going to jump over to the actual instance and run some updates, run some installs, and then further configure this to actually run a deployment. Okay, so we're going to start off with sudo apt get update. So we want to register any updates that are available to the system as it stands in its bare format. And once that's done, we're going to run sudo apt get upgrade. Say yes. It's going to take a second, and we should be good to go here anytime. Anytime. And once this finishes up, then we're going to step over and run some further installations on the Linux packaging system apt-get to set up our development environment with things like pip. So we're going to do a sudo apt-get install python-dev build essential PostgreSQL client and Python 3-pip. Okay, go ahead and hit enter there. And we forgot Nginx, so we'll install that in just a second. So I'll say yes here, then we'll go back and get Nginx. Okay, so one more time, sudo apt-get install nginx is our next command. Go ahead and hit yes. And then just to make sure we're all set, I think we should be fine. We're going to run sudo apt-get update to check and make sure that those are all clean. We just installed them from source with the latest version, so there shouldn't be any discrepancies there. There shouldn't be anything to update, but I like to just check. Okay. Now, we've got nothing in the root of the directory here, nothing of substance anyways, so I'm going to go ahead and do a git remote -v over here just to get the address to my repository. Just a reminder, this is the same thing as clicking the clone or download button and copying the address from a repo directly. So we're going to say git clone and use that .git URL and pull this thing down onto the machine like so. Okay. Now, once we've got that here on the machine, we need to run a couple of things. So the first thing that we need to do is make sure that the machine is able to recognize that when I type Python, it currently means 2.7, or it currently links to Python 2.7. And my application, Django 2, requires that I link or use Python 3. So I'm going to jump over to this USR bin directory. I'm going to do a sudo unlink Python. I want to remove the symbolic link between the command Python and the version or the specific installation 2.7. And then I'm going to inversely link, or ln-s, Python 3.5 to Python. And it will also do something similar for ln-s, or symbolic link from pip3 to pip. Which means that from here forward I can type Python. See that that's now connected to Python 3.5, and I can type pip, and you can see that that's pointing to the Python 3 distribution of pip. Okay, so let's cd back up to the root directory. We're done there. And at this point, we're going to jump into the actual project. Okay, I'm going to step one layer down to where my requirements.txt is. I'm going to say pip install -r requirements.txt. In that way, I'm going to install all of the requirements that I've already set up and cached or frozen in this file for the project. Okay, shouldn't be getting any issues at this point if everything we've done was set up correctly up to here. Okay, that little warning at the bottom for upgrading pip doesn't matter. We don't really need pip except for one more occurrence later on, but it's totally fine doing its thing on version 8x. So now that that's all set up and installed, I can cd down one more level to shopper, and I can see manage.py. Now, in order for me to start working with manage.py, let's go to shell, for example. Okay, it's telling me that I need a secret key, which says Django needs this secret key to even start. And I need that secret key set in the environment of the application. So if we go back over here into shopper, into settings, we can scroll up a little bit right here, and we can see secret key is going to have a value of none. Right? It will not run if there is no value there. And that value has to come out of the environment. So I'm going to step over to my env file for a second, and this is just strictly formatting and easeability for me. I'm going to say export, copy those lines, okay? And actually, before I do that, I need to change some of these values so that my database host and my EC2 instance are pointed at the right place. Okay, so let's go back over and grab those. We're going to copy the EC2 instance. Be sure you put these in the right place, right? EC2 belongs in allowed hosts. And then make sure that there's a space here between the host and localhost, and that there's no space at the end. And then we're going to do the same thing with our RDS instance. I'm going to come over here, and it should be up and running at this point. So let's go back. So Django shopper, just needed a little refresh. And I'm going to grab the endpoint and put that right here. So now what's going to happen, we're going to export these into the environment, and we're going to get a database URL that basically looks something like this. Postgres, let's see, Django, actually it's going to be JS Schmidt : super secret password at my database instance, or my host, port 5432/shopper. So that's what's happening in the background when we take and break these pieces apart. Django is putting them back together to actually connect to that Postgres instance. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these over and just paste these for the time being. And remember, these are just temporary settings. So I'm setting them in the environment for the duration of the shell session. So if I log out, if I start a new shell session, if I refresh in any way, these are going to go away. Okay? So now if I take a look at the environment, I should see things like a secret key, Django settings, DB password. And it looks like we're good. So if I run my manage.py shell one more time, now I should get into the interpreter. Okay, so we can quit that, so we'll go exit. And if I also say manage.py db shell, I should get a direct connection to PSQL through my connection to RDS. So I'm actually looking at RDS at this point. It's a bare database, there's nothing in it. We'll have to migrate our models over here in a bit. We'll wait for that though. Okay, so now that we've got things functional, I can do something like .manage.py run server, and I can see right there there's unapplied migrations that we're aware of. And if I were really ambitious, I could go over and take a look at my app on the web, but it's not going to work yet. Okay, because we've installed Nginx as a front-end proxy, but we haven't configured it yet to actually do its thing. So it's not giving us access. It's kind of a gatekeeper where, as developers, we know on the server that Django is running, but Nginx is sitting there in front of the gate saying, you can't come in here yet, right? I'm up, I'm running, but I'm not configured to actually pass your message back to the active server running on localhost, the thing that we've got running right here. So we're going to do that real quick. So before we start messing with the Nginx config or the default, we're going to go ahead and sudo mv etc nginx sites available default. And I'm going to move that to a default.bak or a backup file. So we'll just do the same path, etc nginx sites available default.back. And then similarly, we'll do sudo nano so that we can edit or create and edit a new default file. etc nginx sites available default. Okay, opens up an editor for us. And now I'm going to grab and copy pasta a little bit of this and do some on-the-fly edits. So we're going to cat out a simple Nginx config. I'm going to just grab this stuff and move it over here. And then we'll run some inline edits here. So we're going to listen on the same port, but I'm going to grab a new EC2 host name, the one specifically that I configured for this app. So let me just get that from here. Copy this, paste that there. I don't need to change anything in the logs, right? Well, actually I will. I'm going to actually, rather than error log, I'm going to make this Django log.log. Okay. My static route, or the static redirect, is going to point to home, Ubuntu, 31, Django, demo, or actually this is shopper, demo, /shopper. Okay, and I don't need to say static. It's going to take care of finding that directory for me. So just demo /shopper. And then media, likewise, will be 31 shopper demo shopper /media. And in this case, we do need to point directly at that thing. Okay. Now, in terms of the location, we really don't need to change too much here, but it's going to get a little simpler than what we used earlier this week. So we're going to do an HTTP 127.0.0.1/8000 or port 8000, and the rest of this is going to stay the same. Okay, so now this is really the key critical piece that says when I hit this page, or when I hit this route, I should say, Nginx is now configured to say, I'm ready to pass your request off to the web application. Okay, so we can Control X, hit Y, hit enter, and we can let Nginx sit there for a second and do its thing. Okay. So now that we've done that, I'm going to step over here and we're going to go ahead and collect static right here. So if I do a /manage.py collect static, okay, what this is going to do is it's actually going to go through all of the applications, Shopper, Shopper Products, Shopper Profile, Admin, any other installed package that has any kind of front end or static assets, and it's going to pick them up and hoist them up into one kind of root folder here at this level called static. And that's how our application is going to get access to those things. So knowing that your development process may change, collect static is something that you're going to run on a regular basis as you add new content to static files or static assets in the app. Okay? And then the next thing that we're going to do, get ourselves prepared for deployment, is go ahead and migrate our database over. So if we do a /manage.py migrate, we've already got the migration set up by running make migrations. And those are in each of the app directories under that migrate folder. So if we just hit migrate, everything should just kick over right to our RDS instance. Okay. Now the last thing that we need to do is, it's twofold. One, we need to get gUnicorn installed and configure systemd to operate with gUnicorn. And then in that process, we're going to create a .env file at this level. So I'm going to start off with that .env file. It's a little out of order than what we did today in lecture, but we'll make it work. So we're going to say sudo nano.env. And at this point, I can get rid of these things, and I'm going to copy this directly into that file. Okay. Key note here, I do not have debug in here. We don't want debug set to true. So keep that in mind. We can save and exit, and now we're set up to configure. And I'll just type it out, cat gunicorn.service. Okay. This is from earlier this week, so we're going to change this one a little bit as well. So we're going to sudo nano again, and this time we're going into ect systemd system gunicorn.service. Okay, I saw a lot of typos in this today, so if you've got an opportunity, let me do that again. I'm just going to hit no here so I don't save that. If you've got an opportunity to type this out, that's great, but be wary and be mindful of typos in these things. Okay, so we can start off by giving this a better description. gUnicorn service for Django Shopper application. Don't need to change the after value. Don't change the user, don't change the group. We do need to change the working directory though. Okay, so we're going to change that working directory to 31-shopper-demo/shopper. And that's going to get us to that shopper level where from that point forward, we have one more layer of shopper, an actual application that has a .whiskey file or a whiskey.py. And that's the target for gUnicorn to function and execute on. Okay. Now, once we've got this down, we need to tell gUnicorn and systemd where that .env file is at. So we're going to type environment file, and this is going to have a value of home Ubuntu 31 shopper demo/.env. Okay, and we're also going to change a little bit of this. So I'm going to shorten up a couple of things. Bear with me for a sec. So we're going to type preload right here. I'll explain that one more time when we get a chance. And I'm going to redo the path for gUnicorn. Okay. First and foremost, the new path to gUnicorn is going to be where we install gUnicorn with pip. And the reason that we're going to install gUnicorn with pip is so that that installation is in the sites packages for pip, specifically in a place where it can easily reference Django. It's not a requirement, but this makes the configuration a little bit cleaner and a little bit easier to work with. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and SSH into an earlier project. So let's SSH into Imager here. which I've torn down. So let's SSH into, how about Shopper Demo? There it goes. And let's do a quick cat on etc systemd system gunicorn.service. Okay, let's double check here, because rather than trying to remember, and we haven't installed this yet, so I'll show you this in a few minutes, but we're going to go ahead and just put home ubuntu.local bin gunicorn, and that's the path to the executable for running gunicorn on this machine after we install it. -- preload is a way for us to get a status level output that includes some debug messages. So it adds another layer of debugging when we look at the status of gunicorn. If something's wrong, we'll actually get an error message or a stack trace that helps us track down what's wrong. I'm going to shorten these to the bind and the workers to -w3 and -b. And then the rest of this is going to get removed as well and rewritten. Okay, so -b 127.0.0.1 port 8000. Okay, that needs to match up to the Nginx config that we created earlier. Okay, so Nginx is going to proxy to localhost 8000. This is telling gunicorn to actually start the Django application on localhost 8000. So the app is running before gunicorn actually starts handing requests back to it. And then we need to target shopper.whiskey. And then there's an implicit colon right here, which is a way for us, it's a syntax for us to address a specific function inside of that whiskey.py file. Okay? That's implicit. It's a convention and a default, so we don't need to actually say colon application. gunicorn is going to do that for us. Okay, now let's save this, hit yes, and we're going to go ahead and go over and do a sudo systemctl enable. Oh, we need to install gunicorn before we try and enable it. So if you type gunicorn, okay, program is not currently installed. We're going to do a pip install gunicorn, like so. Okay, now we can do a sudo systemctl enable gunicorn, and that's going to look at the service file that we just created and enable that and actually set up the symlinks to this thing. Okay, once that's done, we're going to do the same thing for Nginx. And now that both of those have been enabled and registered in the system, we're going to say start gunicorn and start Nginx. Okay. Now, if all things are happy, that didn't work. So what we're going to do, I've got a pretty good idea of what's going on here. We're going to reboot the instance here in a second. But before I do that, something's not right. So I'm going to go ahead and just take a quick look. Sudo systemctl status gunicorn. Okay, everything looks fine there, right? I've got green here, I've got workers here, and I've got a good set of logs here that say starting, listening, working, booting. Okay, nothing's wrong with our gunicorn service. So something's potentially wrong with our Nginx. So let's take a look at that. So likewise, active workers, things are looking good, but that PID file is still a problem. And the only good solution that I've had to this so far is to go ahead and exit the session. Not required, you'll get booted out if you don't do that. And go back to EC2 and actually reboot that instance. So if we reboot this thing, it's going to go through and do its status checks again. We can refresh just to make sure that everything's clean here. We've got green here, we've got green here. All things are happy. And then I'm going to slide back over here, SSH into Shopper, and I'll probably get rejected this time with a timeout. But once we've got reconnected, we'll take another look at the status of things, refresh our website, and we should be good to go. Oh, there it went. Good. So let's do a system status, systemctl status nginx. And once we've got this up and running, we're looking good. So I'm going to slide back over to the browser, refresh the page, and now we look like we've got some things happening. Okay. Now I can sign in, I can sign up. I'm going to go ahead and stop, or actually come back over here. I don't need to stop anything. I'm going to cd over into 31 shopper. I'm going to type manage.py create superuser. That's interesting. So here's a quirk of the system. GUnicorn is aware of the environment variables, specifically the settings in this case, because we set it to work with that .env file. If we also want to do work inside of the running shell instance here, this is something I didn't show you all earlier. We could take and copy these things, including the export tag, and we could go back to our running application, and we could do a sudo nano to the root directory and open up the bash rc file. And there's a whole bunch of stuff already in here. Right up at the top, if I just put env vars here and paste those things in, now I've got two sets of environment variables, which can be tricky if you forget to change them along the way. But for our purposes, it's going to be a pretty isolated instance or an isolated deployment. I'm okay with this because it gets me an opportunity to allow the app to function with GUnicorn, but also gives me the ability to work with the application in a development space or just a QA debug space on the development machine. So I'm going to Control X, save, and now that I've made a change to the bash RC, I need to go ahead and source.bash RC, and that's actually like deactivating and reactivating a virtual environment. Re-registers those things for me. Okay. So now if I take a look at env, I can see those things are sitting here listed out, and I can do a /manage.py, create super user now, and we've got SJ Schmidt, and nope, and we can do this and give ourselves a password, and we should be good to go. So at this point, we come back over, we sign in. There's my super user, and I used admin earlier, which is fine. Either one's good. I like admin for deployed sites just because it's cleaner. And now we should be able to use the app from here.